I think we'll get started. It's great that everyone can be here. We're so glad to welcome you. Just before I say anything else, well, I'm Leon Lloyd. I'm the host today. I'm the Business Development Manager with Edumundo. And what this webinar is all about, embedding experiential learning across the business school. We perhaps, just to sort of say a few housekeeping things, we are recording the session, so please be aware of that. We'll send you a copy of the recording afterwards, and of course sharing it for any who couldn't make it today. If you do have any questions as we're talking, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and we'll try to address your questions as we go. But otherwise, we'll try to keep a bit of time towards the end for dedicated questions as well. Some of the things that we're hoping to discuss today. So as many of you will perhaps be aware, if you've joined any of our webinars over the past year, we tend to hold regular webinars around the sort of module, the course level sort of aims of using management simulations. But this is taking a much more higher level, this conversation today. And we're looking at taking a sort of a much more strategic approach to embedding simulations. So we'll be looking at a range of things. And well, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague, Charles Knight. Charles, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon for those of you joining us from North America. I'm Dr. Charles Knight. I'm an administrator at the University of Salford. I'm also a member of faculty there. And so I'm going to give you a perspective of how we have tried to embed simulations across our college, and within a context, though, of a wider process of changing how we educate our students, which is a mixture of traditional students and non-traditional students.
Thanks, Charles. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into the conversation with you. Before we do, for those of you perhaps who are a bit new to simulations, or perhaps for those of you who are a bit new to Edumundo, we thought we'd just take a few minutes initially before getting into the conversation to just give you a bit of background on Edumundo. So it's just a couple of slides, but we've been operating for around 20 years. So since 2001, our core focus has been developing management simulations, of which we have a very wide portfolio of now. We have around 40 members of staff, most of whom based in the Netherlands, actually at The Hague, which is where the head office is, but I'm calling in from the UK near Bristol and Bath. We work with around 300 universities worldwide, so we have, we're active in all continents of the world, and a number of customers already in Canada and in the US as well. Actually, we work with the private sector too, so we'll support a number of large corporates with their leadership development programs, as well as their talent acquisition programs too. So that is quite useful because we can feed that product knowledge, we can feed that sort of experience and knowledge back into our product development process too. As you can imagine, it's quite a large number of students benefiting from our simulations each year. So whilst we have quite a large portfolio of simulation, there are some commonalities between them. So for example, they're all web-based, as you'd expect. They just work on the browser, and any device is possible. So you can access, students can access using their smartphones if they like, although it's preferable, of course, to have a bigger screen because there's quite a lot of information to consume. But it typically works like this. Students will manage a company with teammates, so with their fellow peers, usually teams of about 4 or 5 in a team. They'll take over an existing company, virtual company, and they'll manage that through a series of rounds, where one round equates to 1 year of operations in the simulation. And usually that's mapped onto an existing course. So one round is usually played within 1 week of study across a number of weeks. The time investment, well, that's very flexible depending on how much time you have available and depending on the level. But the important thing is that it's highly competitive, so that the intelligent algorithm, the nature of how our simulations operate, means that student teams are directly competing against each other, the other student teams on the same course, and not against a computer. And that means it's much more dynamic, it's much more close to real life, and much more engaging and fun, of course. We cater for all levels, so right from the sort of lower levels, right through to sort of postgraduate as well. There's a highly flexible as well in terms of how we'll set them up. And usually these are some of the sorts of high level things which we expect to get out of using the simulations too. So better student engagement and satisfaction from the course, from the students, and well, students much less likely to drop out as a result of being more engaged on their course. Of course, it's an opportunity for students to apply their theoretical knowledge in a safe environment, and it strongly links to the skills piece as well. So developing those graduate attributes which employers are so sought after by employers. It can also be built into the marketing offer, marketing proposition to students as well, in terms of boosting recruitment levels as well. So just the last slide to show at this stage before we get into talking with Charles, just to say, these are some of the courses that we will often find our simulations are used on. As you can see, it's quite a broad variety of different business school type focused courses here, which we're able to support. So do talk to us afterwards if you think that that's of interest. Okay, well, as I say, please put questions as we go in the chat. But Charles, delighted to have you here again, and let's get into the conversation. So perhaps it might be a good point to start with you just giving us a little bit of a background as to how things work at Salford Business School, and also why you started from the outset the initial sort of high-level objectives of deciding to take a strategic approach to embedding experiential learning across the business school.
Certainly. So although I am as British as Mary Poppins, I will try and use the right North American terminologies, but do please correct me in the chat. So the University of Salford is a mixture of what you might consider a technical school and a liberal arts college. We do the whole range of undergraduate education all the way through to postdoctoral studies. The business school as a faculty follows a very similar model to what you may be used to, where we have a mixture of tenured faculty and the use of adjuncts to support them in their work, and also teaching assistants who may be undertaking a PhD. The school or college itself does a wide range of different course areas, from accountancy, business management, economics, and within us we also have a law school. We appointed a new dean 2 years ago, and I was part of a new administration. I'm an administrator and drawn from the faculty. And we decided that we really wanted to think about what the philosophy of the overall school was. And the philosophy of our school is to take both traditional and non-traditional students who may be full-time or part-time, full-time or part-time. And we wanted to make sure that there was what we call deep learning. So across all of our courses and all of the credits that we offer, we've built in the use of simulations, and also tied to the use of simulations, lots and lots of opportunities for our students to work with external partners, our industry partners. The aim is to make sure that our students graduate with the kind of graduate attributes that allow them to get into a high-paid graduate job. One of the drivers for that is that, just as within North America, there is an ongoing debate about the value of college and the value of what students get for a student loan. And so for us, it's both part of the educational experience, but also the journey through in terms of our recruitment, our onboarding of students, and also increasingly our work with our alumni, which is increasingly important in the United Kingdom, to give them a sense of what they're supporting as alumni.
No, absolutely, Charles. And whilst in the UK, of course, there's some regulatory issues, which means that, well, the subject of whether graduates are employable or not, of course, is a big deal, because that's has a direct link to whether or not students are paying back their student fees, which are loaned to them. But I mean, of course, whilst things perhaps different in the US, still, of course, students want to be knowing that they're going to have a good opportunity to graduate with good prospects, good employment prospects. And there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect, perhaps increasingly so over the years, where, you know, the skills which students want to have and the skills which perhaps employers are seeing students having perhaps are not always aligned, really. So it seems like the more that universities, the more that business schools can do to give students the opportunity, not only to understand the theoretical knowledge, but to be able to add value much quicker to the workplace when they start.
Sure. So just starting with the regulatory side, you're absolutely right. So the North American context is very different from what we have here. But I'm sure many people on the call are or have been involved in ASCSB accreditation, which is a really large accreditation that many business schools do, especially in North America. And so I'll talk about this a bit more later, but the use of simulations can be really great if you do have ASCSB or other international accreditation, in being one of the strategies that you can use to evidence learning gain, which those accreditors are really interested in. The second thing is people talk about millennials, and I know in the US context, there's a lot of conversation about millennials. People forget that the oldest millennials are now 40. Leon, you're a millennial. So the other thing about simulations, about the changing marketplace, in terms of recruitment, when you're recruiting Gen Z and younger audiences, simulations in a really competitive marketplace are really exciting because they more closely replicate some of their experiences outside of a university. That generation of students that you're trying to attract in, and we will talk a little bit about postgraduate students as well, they are interested in the kind of simulation experience because it gives them something that they really respond to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And interestingly that you mentioned about the AACSB, because yeah, absolutely, there's some specific pieces in there, aren't there, around innovation and experiential learning, I think around lifelong learning as well. But yeah, the simulations do provide a very clear route to evidencing, as you say, some of the ways that that universities, the business schools can be meeting some of that accreditation. Absolutely.
Yeah, and another thing I think is important, and please do correct me in the audience if I get the terminology correct. One of the ways that we've used simulations is in regards to freshmen and how we onboard freshman students, because the transition for many to the university experience can be quite difficult. And so with our freshman students, we thought really carefully about how we onboard them and get them to understand the college experience. And simulations for our purposes are really good because they can be embedded in courses for freshman students, and then for our midpoint assessment or our midterm assessments, we can make sure students work towards that midterm and we can link it with the assessment. So for us, it was thinking really carefully about how does the use of simulations tie to our overall philosophy of deep learning and helping students develop career capital, as we call it, but also when we're dealing with freshman students or first year students, as we call them, how do we make sure that it supports their onboarding into the college?
Absolutely. Just to go back a little bit, Charles, so you mentioned, I think at the start, talking about the overall ethos at Salford and the philosophy there. You mentioned alongside the use of simulations and this sort of strategic approach, also the work that you're doing around employer relationships, so you have a lot of these sort of existing relationships with employers. And I think the important thing is that what we're offering with simulations isn't necessarily to replace those existing opportunities for students to work with employers, to have placements, to have internships, and to do perhaps live projects and that sort of thing. But it's sometimes to complement that a little bit. So sure. I don't know if
yeah, and I think so. If I get what we tended to do at the University of Salford is our freshman students are involved in simulations and other very controlled access to external partners. When they become sophomores, I think I'm getting the terminology correct. When they become sophomores, what tends to happen is the simulations have helped give them the right grounding, and they've started to learn the terminology of the industries they might work in. Then at the sophomore level and above, they may work with our external partners, our industry partners, on projects generating intellectual property in conjunction with a member of faculty. So a member of faculty works with them to work with an external client, because I think you're absolutely right, Leon. Simulations fit really nicely into an overall philosophy, but they're used with other things as well. And so for us, it's the overall package. There is a really interesting thing that I think we're going to get onto shortly, which is we've decided the philosophy for the school But then we had to get faculty buy-in. We had to get the buy-in of the faculty who actually manage our sections and our courses.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let's come on to that. But perhaps before we do, I think we're just going to have a quick poll, actually. So I think one of my colleagues now is going to poll this question to our audience, and we'll see what the results are. Are one of my colleagues about to do that? I'm just I hope they are. This is where it all might go right.
Oh, here we are. Yes.
Okay, so the question is, describe your current situation. So our institution or school department does not currently use any business simulation software. B has some use of simulations, but only in an ad hoc way. Already takes a strategic approach to embedding simulations. So just give that a minute. And so far, it's 100% B. Oh no, with okay, so it's looking like around 90% have some use of simulations, but only in an ad hoc way. And about 10% does not currently use any business simulation software. Okay, that's interesting. All right. So it doesn't look like we've got anyone who's really taking the strategic approach yet to embedding simulations across the curriculum. So I'll end the poll now.
So if I can just mention, so it's really interesting. People have said about using them in an ad hoc way. So at Salford Business School, before I became part of the administration, that was actually the approach. Individual faculty were using a whole range of different simulations across the different degrees, from undergraduate programs to our postgraduate. We have MBAs, as you'd expect, and other taught postgrad. One of our drivers in our kind of strategic aim is we didn't want to deal with multiple partners. And so one of the reasons that we ended up partnering with Edmundo is the range of simulations they had, frankly, from my perspective as an administrator, meant that it made that there was a more smooth relationship, because we were dealing with one partner for multiple simulations. When I joined, there's no bar on a faculty member proposing that we buy a simulation from another organization. It's just from our perspective, having a strategic relationship with a partner who can offer multiple simulations makes for a smoother relationship.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that, Charles, actually, because I think from our perspective, one of the things that we're really keen to, like one of the messages that we're sort of keen to stress really is that having that sort of arrangement can mean then that the overall benefit to the school, of course, is a consistent approach. So whilst you might have a number of students taking different courses, the students will receive a sort of consistent approach no matter which course they're taking. But that doesn't mean to say that it should be a generic approach. So this is still, of course, to provide something really, really great that's going to really add value to the learning. There still needs to be room for that sort of local tweaking and customization at a course level. But yeah, as you know, as you've noticed, you know, something that provides that consistency, which can be sort of greatly appreciated.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to note for any academics on the call that our interaction with faculty in terms of where we wanted to go with simulations, we held what we call a town hall. Academics faculty came to the town hall, and we said, we've got this partnership. We're looking for people to trial simulations, but it's up to you how you would embed them in your individual courses. We'll give you guidance, but we trust the expert in the room. We trust the expert academic in the room. So please get on board, and we'd really love people to pilot some simulations, but it was always still down to the individual judgment of the academic about how that was embedded. And then there were conversations about if they had a midterm assessment, or some of our courses only have end of year assessment, how did we relate the simulation to what they were doing, textbooks potentially that they were using, and what they wanted to do in terms of assessment.
Yeah, so this is one of the main points, wasn't it, that we wanted to stress there about this, the multi-stakeholder buy-in, really. So when you're doing this type of partnership arrangement at a school level, of course you don't want it to be something where it's imposed upon academics, because, well, potentially then not everyone's bought into it, and you need, of course, people to buy into it, because if it's going to be a success, well, the lecturers, the academics involved in the teaching team need to really want to do this. It needs to be something that they, it doesn't feel like it's sort of forced upon them. So yeah, so I think that's absolutely spot on, Charles, what you're saying there. And I suppose hopefully I'd like to think that we've been able to add value there in terms of our approach by reassuring academics that, you know, we'll take a lot of that burden away from them. So I know from experience that when presented with this idea that, oh, well, you're to use a new system, you know, if an academic thinks, well, I have to learn this new system, it's going to take me a few days of training to get up to speed with it, and I've got to remember how to do all this technical stuff to do with the new platform that I'm not familiar with, and then I'm going to be put on the spot with the students and not be able to answer their questions. That can actually be quite off-putting, I think, for academics.
Absolutely, and also one of the other slightly different contexts in a US context, obviously, academics have more freedom about the design generally of their courses. So the nature of the kind of buy-in that you want to get can change. The other thing I'd mention about buy-in, and you mentioned multi-stakeholders, the other thing we've done a little bit of that people on the call might be interested in, we have an industry advisory board. So the school has industry advisors, some of who are alumni, some of who are strategic industry partners. When we talk to them about our use of simulations and how we use them in the school, quite a few of those want to get involved and come along to some classes and see how the students are using simulations. So even though, be clear, the focus of this is on pedagogical practice and students, it's actually kind of interesting that if you have got alumni or you've got industry partners, it's actually a nice hook to get them involved in what's going on in the school, because they love to come along and talk to the students about, well, what decision are you going to make about this, and what are your decisions this year? And it really adds to the experience. But also for industry partners, they use data all of the time, so it makes perfect sense to them. And so that multi-stakeholder is about students, academics, but it can also be about alumni and industry partners.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, yeah, feel free for those on the call to put anything in the chat if this is resonating with you, or if you have any questions. Which
any hard questions. I like hard questions.
Yeah, Charles really does want some hard questions, so please do put those in the chat. Put him on the spot. That's fine. And look, welcome to you all again. And if there's anyone who's joined us as we've been talking, as you know, this is all about embedding experiential learning across the business school. And I'm here with Dr. Charles Knight, Associate Dean, Academic Student Experience. So we've covered quite a bit already. We've looked at the sort of ethos and the whole strategic approach and the why really of doing this. And we've looked a little bit about stakeholder buy-in and the links to sort of employer engagement and that sort of thing. What about coming back? I think we've touched upon it a little bit, but thinking about in terms of, building it into the curriculum. So linking it to assessment.
There's a really good question in the chat actually that links to this. Did you have any more take up from your academics after town hall? Really good question, thank you. Yes, we did. But I think part of this is tied to your overall philosophy as a college or as a school. And so we've always been really clear, and I've always been really clear in my tenure, that academics should feel safe to try new things. And that if something doesn't quite work, then we look at it together and we think about how we tweak in the future. The other thing I think is really important, many academics, and I say this with love in my heart, don't want to change what they've done. They've kind of got their model. It might be based around a textbook and using chapters from a textbook and sections. So the other thing we had to make really clear to academic staff was this is a way you can get more engagement from students, but also this will not significantly change your workload. Most of our academics are also researchers. So there is the trade-off for our academics about both teaching and research, or they do enterprise activity. So yeah, we did have take up. So Dave, now we're getting lots of questions. So what was the big change to get all the faculty to agree when respecting academic freedom? So we didn't get every single faculty member to agree. It's not that every faculty member now uses a simulation. what we did was we asked faculty members who'd be interested in getting involved to identify on their courses where a simulation would be used. We mapped that on our courses, and then on courses where academics were not using simulations, either they continued with what they wanted to do, or some of them are involved in slightly different things about industry partnerships. I think the key thing is, though, as you know, academics are curious people. And so many of our academics just really wanted to try something slightly different. And there was always the discussion with our academics, try it on the course that's running this year. If you don't find that it works, then you can change back. Absolutely no questions asked.
And
There is another question. Yeah, sorry,
just to add, Charles, I think yeah. So like how we usually find this will work is that we'll, you know, whilst every student will be usually undertaking multiple courses in each year of study, we don't necessarily want a simulation on every course, but we want every student to have the opportunity to do a simulation in each year of study, right? So in that sense, of course, there's still multiple academics who you know, it won't be appropriate for every academic to use the simulation, but it will, ideally we'll have one. Let's say if students are doing 6 courses, for example, in a year of study, then hopefully we'll get, you know, one academic at least within those who will sort of put their hand up and say, well, yeah, I'd like to be a bit more innovative and try something new, and then we can work with them to make it align with their the content.
So there is another good question in the chat. Shauna is putting me on the spot, which is good. How did I not change their workload? So, in brief, our academics who were faculty who were making use of simulations, Leon mentioned at the start that it was round based. So what it meant for a lot of those staff is content that they would deliver, or what we would call in the United Kingdom stage on the stage, where they would stand up and transmit knowledge. They kind of became more facilitators and coaches. So the students would work together more in groups to say, these are kind of decisions we're going to make as a group, and they compare and contrast. What that meant was for the academic colleagues, the faculty, there was less pre-prep for them to do in advance of the course running, but also the students were far more active. This is kind of based on some work I'd done previously. In the United Kingdom, I was nominated for a national award, Most Innovative Teacher in Higher Education, doing a very similar model. If you're interested, Leon, I'm sure has got your details. I wrote it up and I can send you a copy of the kind of practicals of how we embedded these things.
I'm sure that would be really appreciated by everyone, Charles. No, thanks for offering to do that. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps just to add from my perspective that there is, I find, usually, especially for academics who have not had any experience with simulations, there is this feeling that it can take a huge amount of workload to try to actually integrate this into the course, you know. But actually, once we've had a look at the module or the course outline, we can make adjustments to the simulation. We can try to fit it to really sort of meet the existing learning objectives and the existing assessment criteria and frameworks. So in that sense, all that's left really is for so the theory that the academic is delivering still stays the same, and that's still done outside of the simulation, but the simulation is providing the context, the relevance, and the opportunity for students to apply that theoretical knowledge. So then it's just a case of working out how much time is available for students to spend in the simulation. Should that be done in the seminar, in the workshop, or should it be done perhaps outside of the allocated, dedicated time?
Sure. I think a really good point, because the assessment, what we call the assessment diet, tends to be slightly different in North America. So one way to think about the embedding, I think Leon's mentioned this, one model that you could think about to embed is that the sessions with the academical faculty is about discussing theoretical concepts and how they would apply to the simulation. And the students are working on making their decisions around the simulations outside of that period. And you could use that for, if your courses, your faculty want to do this, you use that for participation marks. And so across your course, students have to participate in the rounds, and part of their credit or mark is based upon that.
Okay, well, we're getting some really great questions. Yeah, please continue to put these questions in the chat and as we're talking. But it seems to have gone a little bit quiet for the last minute or so. So perhaps what we'll do is we will go in for another poll question. So perhaps one of my colleagues can, put one of these poll questions. And yeah, here we are. Okay, so the question is, which areas do you think you'll get the most gains from? So by potentially taking a strategic approach to embedding simulations across the curriculum. So would that be A, improving marketing and converting applicants into students? So building that into the student offer. B, improving rates of continuation beyond the first 12 months. So retention, really, retaining students. And of course, linked to completion as well, completion of studies. C, improving rates of progression into graduate employment. I think these are, these are certainly terms which we use quite a lot in the UK. I think these are all applicable in North America, but please correct us if that's not the case. So those are the three really, or D. I should say D there. D, all of the above. Okay, so we're getting quite some responses already. It seems to be quite a mixture, actually. So we've got about 15% saying A, improving marketing and converting applicants. About 30% saying improving rates of continuation beyond the first 12 months. About 15% also talking about progression. And well, mostly the responses are in D, so all of the above. So around 50% actually. Okay, well, that's really interesting.
So if I can pick up on just a couple of things there, and I'm going to start from the back and go to the front. And I have seen your question, Cynthia. We'll pick up on that in a moment. In regards to that improving rates of progression into graduate employment, one of the things we like about simulations is that the University of Salford, as part of its mission, has lots of non-traditional students. So we attract students who are first generation. They're the first one in their family to go to college. And part of the reason we're so keen on simulations is if you look at the graduate recruitment process, part of that is about using the right language. So all the way through their 3 years with us, our undergraduate degrees are 3 years in the United Kingdom, we're trying to make sure that they understand the language and the terminology that might be used in industry, because all of the research shows that students who interview, if they can use the right terminology, they're more likely to be able to get into high paid employment. So there is that side of it as part of our overall picture. And the other thing that a lot of you have said about improving rates of continuation, the other thing that's really important to us, and we do this in a number of different ways, for our non-traditional students, college is a really strange place. It doesn't make any sense to them. Their family members have never been. They don't understand the language, the strange customs we have. Simulations are really good because they help our non-traditional and traditional students even bond to each other because they're working together in groups. One of the core things in the United Kingdom, it may be different in the North American market, is students who do not engage with other students in the first 6 to 8 weeks are more likely to drop out because they do not make those personal connections. So I think that's really important. And then the other one that people have mentioned about marketing converting applicants, the United Kingdom market is very, very competitive. And so simulations actually are something that we talk about increasingly, and the whole experiential learning in our recruitment material. We also feature students more heavily in our recruitment in social media terms, talking about their use of simulation. So for us, it's definitely strategic because we use it across that whole student life cycle, that whole student journey, from applicant to student to alumni.
And that's quite, I think that student offer, that marketing piece is really quite powerful now. It's so, of course, it's so competitive now, isn't it, higher education? And it's so important to make sure that you're continually getting good numbers of students applying and enrolling in your institution. So one of the ways that we add a little bit of value there as well through our simulations is that upon completion of the simulations, all the students get a certificate afterwards, winners certificates and participation certificates. And on those certificates, they get like a little button they can click on the certificate to share it on LinkedIn, a little bit like sharing one of these badges, which is quite nice then, because that then, well, it's sort of doing a bit of the marketing for you on your behalf, because you're then, students are sort of sharing all that experience as well, which is quite nice.
So Cynthia's got her question, which is, we've incorporated Mike's bikes into our introductory course for freshmen. We're having difficulty finding appropriate simulations and incorporating them into other courses in our curriculum, accounting, sales and marketing, and economics especially. Any advice? So we do have, and Leon would have a better idea of how they're used elsewhere, we have embedded simulations into our accountancy programs. So in the United Kingdom, accountancy programs can be accredited or not. We have an accredited accountancy program that mean students are partly professionally qualified in the United Kingdom on graduation. So we have managed to do it into accountancy. Interestingly, in the United Kingdom, there are not many sales degrees. I'd love to introduce one actually, but you might have some. That might be a conversation you have offline actually, Leon, about where they might fit.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, well, certainly the accounting is, it's a good one that you stress that, Charles, because often we find that maybe that's an area that's not particularly well catered for when it comes to experiential learning. But we've successfully, with Salford Business School, managed to embed a different simulation at first, second, and third year for accounting. So, of course, in the third year, it's more strategic than in the first year. It's a bit more introductory and basic, but that's of course important as well, whether it's for accounting or any subject. It's important that we're getting that appropriate progression through the levels of study as well, so that students aren't too overwhelmed in their first year and faced with a whole load of decisions that they don't understand. But then in the second and third year, they're going into deeper. I think you've already touched upon some of this, but Cynthia, yeah, I hope Charles's comments on that were helpful, and please feel free perhaps to drop us a message afterwards if you'd like any specific advice. Sure. Around that. We often find a good starting point is to look at the learning objectives and then sort of work backwards from there, really. So we'd be happy to sort of have a review of your current situation. So just let us know. Okay. But yeah, great to see so much involvement in the chat and so many questions. I think, well, Charles, one of the things that we discussed as well previously was around whenever you're looking at this, so it's not, we're not talking about simulations on an ad hoc module level basis. We're talking about a big partnership here, covering potentially thousands of students, all taking advantage of simulations. It's important from an administrative point of view, of course, that you're getting value and that you can demonstrate value from the financials and from the decisions that you're making. So I suppose my question is, what are you looking for in terms of data to support your decision making around this?
Sure. So in the UK system, we have quite a lot of different bits of data that we collect about our students. So in terms of evaluating, well, I'll take a step back. So just so people are aware, as an administrator, I control the budget. And as a budget holder, I can approve spend. And so we approve spend on the simulation partnership. For a partnership to continue, I've got to provide evidence that there is value for money and that it helps us in our mission. And so the kind of things that we look at are as follows. Does this overall increase the engagement of our students? We use the Blackboard VLE platform, which some of you may be familiar with. And so we would look at, does this change year on year the engagement of students on the individual courses that they're on? The second thing that we look at is we do some analysis after a course has finished to see if it's made any changes to the number of students who submit their work on time and the overall pass rate. So as this partnership works through, we are collecting evidence about that. That will be used for the justification to renew the partnership. The other thing, going back to the ASCSB, the University of Salford is heading down the road of doing ASCSB. I've done it myself at other universities, other colleges. And so one of the things we're also really interested in is, can we evidence learning gain? Can we evidence that students, when they go from freshmen to sophomores and all the way through to alumni and graduates, can we evidence that we have increased their knowledge of the areas that are on their degree? And a big issue in the United Kingdom is about discrete skills. Our employers are increasingly interested in students having technical skills. So we use this to try and help us measure, are we getting students to develop those analytical skills? Cynthia, you mentioned there as well, which is tied to this, that you've got a mixture of traditional, non-traditional students. Percentage of non-trads is increasing, exactly the same United Kingdom. Also, which depending on the type of institution that you're at, increasingly lots of our students work, and they work more hours than we recommend because they need to support their studies. And so for our non-trad students, quite a lot of them are not engaged in the extracurriculum things that you would expect students to be engaged in on a university campus. We're a campus-based university. So simulations, if I just go back to this point, are really good because simulations help your non-trad students feel less alien, because you can get them into activities with other students early on. And they start to think, hey, actually, I'm a college student. I should be here. Which, you know, I'm smiling when I say it. I'm a non-trad student myself. I was the first in my family to go to college, and nobody else had ever been. It was a very strange place. And so we think all the time about, how do we make our university more sticky? How do we get our students to stay? And for our non-trad students, with a whole range of other measures, these kind of things we think are helping make it sticky.
Well, absolutely. I mean, just to add from my perspective, Charles, I think, you know, I was reading something only this week about how important giving students a sense of community and a sense of belonging is in order to, yeah, make them, you know, it's to link to their overall likelihood to achieve in higher education. It's so important. But beyond that,
and actually, sorry, I'm just thinking something to mention. If you do have lots of non-trad students, I apologize. I do not know what the terminology for this is in North America. In the United Kingdom, oh, I think I do actually. In the United Kingdom, we have a version of what I think you would call an associate degree, which is below a full degree. And we have lots of students who initially enroll on what I think you would call an associate degree. And so we call them foundation students. So our foundation students, we've used simulations with our foundation students, but with them, we've also spent time making it a more competitive process in a fun way. So we wouldn't do this with all of our students, but where we have used simulations, we did have a little bit of a prize giving, and the students who competed on one of our courses, it was competitive. And at the end, besides the credit that they got for the course, there was a little bit of a prize giving. It was really powerful. I didn't do the prize giving, the faculty member who ran the course did it, but it was really powerful because it just increased that sense of community. Sorry, Liam.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, for me, especially at that level, but actually at all levels, you know, it's around coming back to this point I made earlier around this the context and relevance for students. So when coming into a new environment, and you know, students don't necessarily know how to learn or what to expect, and actually, you know, your point, Charles, about the sage on the stage, that's often, you know, not necessarily the most sort of well, easy to understand for students. So actually, for simulations to be able to provide this ability for students to relate the theory to, it can be really helpful for students.
So there's nothing I should pay you afterwards, Cynthia, because you're doing my business, asking me lots of questions. Effectively, in the United Kingdom system, we split the difference a bit. So our non-traditional students includes first generation plus people who potentially are coming back to the college experience post 25. So we define it slightly differently. And you've asked the question there, do you think simulations are good alternative internships? Now, internships are really interesting because we've kind of mainly talked about the undergraduate experience. We have large numbers of international students who come to the United Kingdom on a student visa. And those students do have the right, as part of their student visa, to do an internship as part of their degree. So for us, simulations, we tend to use alongside the opportunity to do internships, except I suspect you've got lots of students who would love to do an internship, except for either economic reasons or for family reasons. We have lots of students who commute and look after family members. They can't really do an internship. And for those students who can't do an internship, simulations are really good because they do give them that kind of simulated experience. I'd love all of my students to do internships. I try to encourage all of them to do internships. But for economic and family reasons, many of them can't do internships. So to an extent, they are. In my ideal universe, they'd all do simulations and an internship.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you, Cynthia, for these questions. Please, please carry on if you have any more, because it's really great. Anyone else have any more questions? Please feel free to put them in the chat, of course. Oh, we have another one already. I believe simulations matter. It would benefit more from industry specialists with some certifications.
So that's that's a really good question. And just so you know, in our accreditation system works slightly differently. So what we tend to have in the University of Salford, we actually hire people who are what we would call alternate faculty, and in some cases they're adjuncts, but it's not quite the same as an adjunct, in that we hire people with industry experience who have got qualifications, and we hire them as what we call an industry fellow or an industrial fellow. And they don't tend to do traditional faculty teaching, but they come in and do workshops and other things, advisory work with students about startups, being self-employed, being a contractor. And so, yeah, I totally agree. We try to make sure we've got a mixture of people with different skills, all the way through to your more traditional member of faculty who's gone through the PhD route, tenured faculty route. Although we don't have tenure.
Okay, well, we're coming towards 20 past the hour now. So I think what might be nice is to just run one more poll question, I think. So perhaps if one of my colleagues can launch that question. So the question is, what are the main barriers to embedding simulations across the school from your perspective? So staff are already busy. There'll be a backlash if this is imposed on them. B, difficulties linking to assessment. Or C, what we've seen is too generic and we need something more tailored to our individual programs. It'd be great to see what the responses are to this one. And this, of course, speaks quite strongly to some of the things that we've been talking about, especially about multi-stakeholder buy-in, about the town halls, which Charles mentioned, and just generally about the sort of support which is needed to make sure that staff are on board with this type of approach. Okay, well, I'll just give it a little bit.
Staff are already busy, yeah. So if I just, let's see if anyone else answers. See if we get any
I think it's 100% staff are already busy. So it's this sort of feeling that this won't be welcomed by staff, I think. Although we've also got sort of about 13% now on what we've seen is too generic. We need something more tailored. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah. So that staff are already busy. Absolutely. So again, in the United Kingdom context, and I know it differs significantly in North America, there is concern about academic faculty workload and the amount of work that they need to do, and the balance between teaching and the balance between research and actually enterprise activity. We generate enterprise income. So for us, again, it was about giving faculty the choice and explaining how it was an alternative to some things they were doing, and the intention was not to increase their overall workload. And I've got to stress this, all of the people who do simulations in the school are people who volunteered to try simulations. There's no case of me having to try and strong arm anyone into doing a simulation. And I think this goes back to the academic mission and academic endeavor, which was, please try it, let us know what you think. And if you try it and you don't like it, then stop. Absolutely no problem. I think the core thing in our philosophy, though, is just like the students, we want our faculty to try new things. And actually, the faculty respond to trying new things because I'm sure we've all been there. You've taught the same course for a number of years, and it's just nice to try something different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Candice has just commented on there. If you've dropped out already, Candice, then that's fine, of course.
Well, that's actually for you to contact her.
Yeah. I was just going to say, well, we'll be in touch, of course. Yeah, but that's great that you're interested. But I think that's quite right. Just to add to that, Charles, it's important, isn't it, that whilst what you're saying is that students volunteered for this, they weren't being, it wasn't being imposed on them.
No.
At the same time, there's sort of a piece before that, which I think is really important, which is that, that staff have to understand what's involved if they do put their hand up and say, well, I want to be involved in this. Otherwise there perhaps will be an element of the unknown. Well, actually, how much extra workload is this going to add to I'm already overloaded with my teaching allocation, with everything else I've got, with my marking. And so, I think there's that missing bit really, which of course we can support with too.
So there's a very good question. You're asking me all these good questions. Do you have trouble incorporating simulations into online versus Zoom remote versus more traditional face-to-face courses? I'll give my answer, and then Leon, I suspect, has got a slightly different answer. Basically, no. So during the COVID period, that strange period we all lived in, my university went from a mixture of entirely face-to-face to doing online delivery during a national lockdown, to then doing a hybrid model where some elements are in person, some are online, and what is sometimes referred to as high flex, where students could decide if they were going to be online in person. And we also tried dual delivery, where an academic or faculty member would deliver in person, but it would be also simultaneously online. If you're going to incorporate simulations into online, in my experience, in our experience, you have to think really carefully about the setup in terms of making sure that students are able to be formed into groups, and there are opportunities for students to engage with each other. Because as I'm sure you know, oddly, even though our younger students are all on social media, trying to get them to form into groups online when they don't meet is more difficult than if you've got them in a room together, trying to get them to do things. So there are challenges around it, but like everything, it's to do with planning. And someone's come to save me. Sean has come to save me in the comments. We incorporate simulation during COVID, work well now, continuing in person, which is fundamentally what we did. It's a really good idea. Form the teams in advanced simulation. We also, as we basically returned to face-to-face in the United Kingdom, there are some things we're going to continue to do online because we found that they work better. And some of our courses will be offered in multiple deliveries. So students who want a face-to-face campus experience can come face-to-face campus. Some we're going to offer as an online alternative. And that will be for the different audiences we have, the different groups of students.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think, before this strange COVID period that happened to the world, we were actually already supporting some wholly online courses, international courses. But I must say that was quite a small percentage of our overall simulations that we had with our university customers. So most of our customers were using simulations on campus in a mixture of, some using it asynchronously. So, actually allowing students to really get into their teams in their own time, perhaps find a little space on campus to work in their teams. And some were using it more, synchronously, of course, in the class, perhaps in computer labs or in the lecture theatre even. So that was, I say, the majority of the situation. But of course, during COVID, well, everything changed. We we managed to successfully transition pretty much all of our existing customers into an online modality, primarily through revising and really refining carefully the service proposition and the service offering that we have, which we've, as I say, really fine-tuned now over this period, and it works really well. So there's a number of tips and tricks we can share, but I mean, there's, as you know, there's things we can do now with the technologies, which makes it very easy. So yeah, for example, like with Blackboard Collaborate, if you're using that in your teaching, then we can preset breakout rooms, and we can even ensure that the login details to the simulation are already placed in those breakout rooms to make it very easy from a sort of organizational point of view. And we can even make sure that there's like a support person in the main room, so that if there's any questions, then teams can come back from their breakout rooms to ask questions and things like that. But I think it's yeah, I think from my perspective, there's no reason it shouldn't work as well online as it does on campus. Thank you, Shauna, for your comments. Yeah, it's been a really great conversation, Charles. I think we're drawing close to the to finishing now. So perhaps I'll just yeah, well, unless there's any more comments for anyone else, if you have.
Yeah,
any,
sure. And a genuine offer. Anyone who's got kind of very specific questions about how we embedded, if you reach out to Leon, I'm quite happy to provide an answer or have a chat with anybody. So no problem whatsoever.
That's really good of you, Charles. Thank you. And well, whilst there's yeah, it's only so much time we've got during these points, it's been really great to yeah, I can see there's one more question: how to get more information. So perhaps it's helpful if I just share this slide as a last slide here. You can feel free to email me directly on leon.l@edumundo.co.uk, and I'll provide any information that you need. Or you can reply to any of the emails you might have had, the marketing emails from some of my colleagues too. Or you can find us on LinkedIn as well. And Charles, can people find you on LinkedIn if they want to connect?
Yes, yeah. So I'm Charles Knight on LinkedIn. So nice and straightforward, Dr. Charles Knight. So I'm relatively easy to find. Or if you can't remember that, if you drop Leon an email, you know, we can arrange something. Absolutely fine. That's
great. Okay, Charles, thank you so much for being involved. It's been great to talk, and well, all the very best.
Thank you.
And thanks to all our participants. Thanks so much for joining, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon, and we can continue the conversation individually. All the best. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.